Hi, this is JFK assassination researcher Richard Hooke, and as we approach the anniversary of President Kennedy's death, November 22nd, 2018, I just wanted to take a minute here, or a few minutes, and do one more video on the hit teams because some new information has come to light, and I want to do it completely. Make sure everything is covered, as we have a lot of knowledge now that we didn't have in the past, and we now can put the entire picture together much better than we ever could before. So I'm going to go over this with you here. Just to start right in the county records building, which was about right here. Actually, it's underneath my poster here. We had Sheriff Harry Weatherford was a shooter. Okay, he was definitely shooting from the corner there. Okay, and he was assisted by Michael Victor Mertz, or AKA Gene Sutra. Okay, so that's on the county records building. Sheriff Harry Weatherford. Okay, the Dal-Tex building, which was over here. The second floor by the fire escape. The shooter was Chuck Nicoletti. And he was assisted by Richard Kane, also known as Richard Scalzetti. Okay, Chuck Nicoletti overshot and he hit the chrome windshield edge, upper chrome windshield edge in the limousine. Chuck Nicoletti, he shot over the top of President Kennedy. Okay, and he was in the second floor window by the fire escape of the Dal-Tex building. Okay, and George H.W. Bush was a manager of the Dal-Tex action. He was either down the street or up in that window there. We're not sure exactly which, but he was a manager of the Dal-Tex part of the hit. And also Jim Brading was there in the Dal-Tex building, and Jim Brading may well have been on the roof. Actually, photo analyst Guy Cooper has produced a photo of the roof of the Dal-Tex, and you can see a shooter up there with a waist pack. And Disc Asset Rod McKenzie told me that Jim Brading had one of those. We know he was in the Dal-Tex, so it's a good chance that was Jim Brading shooting from the roof. We're not sure where that his bullet would have ended up, but Jim Brading was definitely there. Okay, other assistants in the Dal-Tex building that have been mentioned are Rafael Chichi Quintera. He was possibly there also. Okay, in the Texas School Book Depository here. Okay, the main shooter was Mac Wallace. Mac Wallace was the real sixth floor shooter. It wasn't Lee Oswald. It was Mac Wallace, and he's right here in the third window. From the end. Okay, Mac Wallace. He was O&I. He was also DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, and he was assisted by Loy Facker, who was a hired gunman by Wallace, who was standing next to him in the window next to him. They had a radio person, communications person, Ruth Ann Martinez, who was standing behind Wallace and Facker, communicating by walkie-talkie down to Danny Arce in front of the Dal-Tex building, and possibly with a second floor command center where Lyndon Johnson had his assistant Cliff Carter in the second floor command center. So we had Wallace, Facker, and Martinez on this end of the floor. The sniper's nest at the time of the shooting was empty. Okay, that's where Lee Oswald was supposed to be, but he bailed a couple minutes early. Lee Oswald, a CIA agent. He was also O&I, and he was an FBI informant. But Lee Oswald bailed early, so he wasn't there. He didn't shoot at all. Okay, and what he did is that as soon as Wallace went to the other end of the floor, Lee was able to go back through the boxes and bail. He went down to the first floor doorway right below the sniper's nest, but on the first floor, and was photographed in there by Ike Alkins. Oswald just put down a couple of pre-fired shells and bailed early. So that's what he did. He never shot, never did a warning shot or anything. Okay. And as I said, Danny Arcee had a walkie-talkie which was talking to Ruth Ann, and he was in front of the Dal-Tex building. Next to him was Johnny Roselli, of the CIA and Mafia. Roselli had a CIA issue mobile phone, and he lent it to Arcee to communicate during the hit. Okay. But that's where Roselli was. We can see him actually in enhanced versions of the Altkin 6 back there standing next to Roselli, and it looks just like him. There's really not any doubt he owned had a mobile phone. So it was Roselli next to Arcee. Okay. Okay. Okay, I just wanted to make a note because I haven't mentioned it all the time before. But, well, first of all, basically Wallace did 2 shots. Wallace did the back shots to Kennedy and Conley. Mac Wallace did. Okay, his shot, it came down and hit President Kennedy in the back. Came down at an angle and slammed into his spine and stopped right there. It didn't go through. That was Wallace who did that. And then Wallace also hit Conley in his back, okay, with a separate shot. And went through Conley's right back into his through his right wrist into his left thigh. Also coming down at that same angle, right back to the left thigh. You can see the angle lined up with where Wallace was positioned there in the TSBD. Okay, Loy Factor, I believe, fired the first shot because he didn't want to shoot President Kennedy. He told Mackenzie that after the assassination, and he shot wide. That's what he told Mackenzie, and so that would have been the first shot that smacked into the street like a firecracker, and it may well have ricocheted down and wounded James Tegg, who was a car salesman standing by the triple underpass. But that was Factor. He shot wide there. And also, I just wanted to mention, this is my theory. Now, my theory here that we're going over with here claims that all of the shooters were by the buildings, county records, Dal-Tex, TSBD, and then the northern and southern grassy knoll. All the shooters were around here, either in these buildings behind or on the grassy knoll. I don't claim any shooters from the South Knoll at all, or the triple underpass. That's not part of my theory. I don't believe it happened. I believe all the shooters were over here. And so I just wanted to mention the hole in the windshield. That's the mysterious hole in the windshield. In my theory, it was either from Loy Factor's first shot, it went through the windshield and down off the side of the street and ricocheted down, or it was another shot from the back that went over President Kennedy's head, over William Gruen, through the windshield, and off the opposite side of the street. So in my theory, the windshield hole was a miss from the rear. I know other people have other theories, but this is my theory, that it was a miss from the rear. Okay, and I claim that President Kennedy's throat shot was from the badge man, Roscoe White, that went through the sign. But anyway, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. Okay, so let's see. So yeah, actually, and by the way, Wallace and Oswald, they were seen before the shooting, about 10 minutes prior, getting the rifles ready. Okay, so they were seen in the sniper's nest early. Okay, Wallace and Oswald were there. Okay, they were seen by prisoners in the county records building, directly across at the same level, and also Randolph Carr from another building, who saw Wallace and Oswald. Randolph Carr saw Wallace in there with horn rim glasses and a brown coat. And so they were getting the rifles ready. They were seen in there about 10 minutes early, is what it was. Now, actually, there were sightings of 2 guys on the opposite end one dark-skinned guy, which would have been Loy Factor, who was a Chickasaw Indian, and then two shooters were seen, standing shooters. Okay, so that would have been Factor and Wallace shooting, standing up a little bit back from the windows and shooting down. Okay, and the witness statements that said they saw shooters up here, they all said they were standing shooters, and the witnesses' statements were made to sound like they were describing a shooter in the sniper's nest, but they weren't. The shooters they actually saw were through these windows. They saw Wallace and Factor standing up, shooting down from this end here. There was no shooter in the sniper's nest, and we know that because Oswald bailed with 2 minutes to go. He hadn't told anybody he was going to do that, so there was nobody to replace him. The sniper's nest was empty. The shooters were over here, and the sightings of the shooters up in the building were standing shooters. Okay, so they were Wallace and Factor. I just wanted to make that clear, okay, because it is confusing when you read the way the witness statements have been turned around many times by the FBI to make it sound like it was Oswald, but they weren't. And actually, afterward, the employees of the Texas School Book Depository on the floor below, the African American employees, were told to made to say they heard activity above, like shells dropping. Look, they said what they were told to say to stay alive, okay? But there was nobody up here. Oswald put the couple shells down a few minutes early and bailed. Okay. Just wanted to make that clear. So the pristine bullet found at Parkland Hospital that they said was Oswald's shot, it wasn't shot at all that day. It was planted by Jack Ruby, that pristine bullet. It had been fired from the Patsy rifle on an earlier occasion, and Ruby just happened to have it with him so he could plant it, is what it was. And they planted that at Parkland, Ruby did, so they could match the Patsy rifle with the shooting. So they had to find a bullet that supposedly came out of the limousine or fell out of JFK or whatever they were going to try to say with the magic bullet that came from the Patsy rifle. That's the story of the magic bullet. It was just planted by Jack Ruby at Parkland Hospital. He was seen down there by a reporter also, so I'm sure that's what he did. In the TSBD, there was also a command center on the second floor, okay? And the command center was in the windows looking out down on Elm Street. They had a very good view. And in there was Lyndon Johnson's assistant, Cliff Carter, was there. George Reese was there, and Carlos Marcello was there. He was not down in New Orleans. He was there. Rod McKenzie verified that Wallace told him that Marcello was definitely in the command center. So he must have paid off a judge in New Orleans to say he was down there in court. And they used Regis Kennedy, who was an FBI guy covering up for the assassination, to provide false witness that Marcello was in court. I don't believe it. Okay. So Cliff Carter had a radio, okay, and he was communicating down to the pergola round nearest the picket fence behind Zapruder with Jack Grimm, who was a communications man in there with a radio, Cliff Carter. And he also, very likely from the second floor, was communicating to the presidential limousine to Kellerman, Roy Kellerman, who was the communications within the presidential limo, because he had a radio also, okay. So yeah, in the Altkin 6 photo down in the TSB doorway, that's where Lee Oswald was at 12:30 when the shooting happened. And Lovelady was there also. He just wasn't by the post. He was by the opposite wall with his hands overhead, Lovelady, shielding his bald head from the sun. Okay. And actually, when you look at the Altkin 6 photo, you will notice that there's no trace of Bew Wesley Frazier, although he said that that's Lovelady is Dorman, but I mean, he's not even there. There's no trace of Frazier there. So how would he know? He says he was back in the dark, but we we can't see him there. As far as there was very little room back in the dark. And I just wanted to mention that there's a good chance that Frazier was in the basement cutting the power, because somebody did it when the car came up Houston Street. The power was cut in the TSPD. And we know that the women and African American employees were not involved. So there was only a certain amount of white guys. Many of them, Danny Arcee was out here, and many of them were in the doorway. So Frazier is the one guy who's unaccounted for. I'm saying there's a good chance he cut the power. Okay, he's not in the doorway. He's still trying to say Lovelady was in the doorway. Lovelady was doorman, but he knows that's not the case. He's lying for the deep state. He knew Lee Oswald very well. He knew his shirt. He knows darn well the guy by the post is Lee Oswald. Okay. So let's see. And also, I just wanted to mention that Lee Oswald exited the plaza at 12:40. He was picked up by Ruth Payne's station wagon by the TSB northern end of the knoll. Lee Oswald exited the plaza. There was no bus and cab ride. And there's a good chance that actually was Bulesley Frazier, because he was wearing a blue coat and may well have taken the bus back towards the downtown and produced the bus ticket that they said was Oswald's. That may have come from Frazier, who was wearing a blue coat and more than likely took the bus, but it wasn't Oswald. He was picked up by Mrs. Payne, a station wagon supplied by Mrs. Payne, that Oswald drove in that morning, so he didn't bring any package. He didn't ride with Frazier. And it was used as a pickup vehicle that after the assassination had picked up Frank Sturgis from the rail yard, went around and got Mac Wallace on Record Street and circled around and got Oswald. So it picked up Wallace and Sturgis with a Latino driver and Oswald. Mrs. Payne's Nash Rambler was supplied by Mrs. Payne. Originally, the light green Rambler came from Clay Shaw in New Orleans. It wasn't Mrs. Payne's main vehicle. It was another one. So there's confusion. It wasn't Mrs. Payne's wagon that you see pictures of in her driveway. Okay. Now that brings us down to the grassy knoll. Okay. So now the grassy knoll hit teams. In the northern grassy knoll, there were many shooters behind Zapruder, concealed in the pergola. We know there were now from enhanced photos. Okay, there were at least 3 shooters in and around the pergola. Okay, there was one behind. There was one in the pergola round, and there was one right next to the pergola round. Okay, we know that for sure. There may have been more, and they may have been using silenced .38 automatics, because Chauncey Holt said that he brought some when he arrived in the rail yard. Chauncey Holt, who was a radio man in one of these hit teams on the grassy knoll. Okay, but the shooters in the pergola behind Zapruder, Mackenzie said, Wallace provided some names, said the shooters were John Ernst and Clyde Faust of the Dixie Mafia. Okay, and then we had Charles Harrelson standing next to the round, who was also a shooter. Okay, in the pergola we had Joe Dugan. He was from the Irish Republican Army. He was picked up the shells. And Charles Frederick Rogers was also either in that round or in front next to Harrelson, either a spotter and maybe a shooter. Charles Frederick Rogers, he was there also. Okay, and Chauncey Holt was the communications man with the radio also. He's probably standing around the back of the pergola. You can't see him, but he was probably there. So that's the northern grassy knoll shooters. Okay. The southern knoll, behind all the picket fence, down here, the southern knoll was all managed by Frank Sturgis. Okay, behind the picket fence. That included Roscoe White, who was the main shooter down there. Okay, and Frank Sturgis, actually, we know he was paid for the hit the night before. At the Dallas Cabana Motel, Marita Lorenz testified that she saw Sturgis given a huge wad of cash from E. Howard Hunt, which was the CIA bagman who paid Sturgis the night before to manage the hit. Okay, so And Sturgis had trained Roscoe White in New Orleans to be planted in the Dallas police. Roscoe White, the badge man, was the main shooter behind the picket fence. He was assisted by J.D. Tippett, who was his spotter, and ran off the rifle. Okay, I don't believe J.D. was a shooter. I don't think so. I think in the Mormon photo we can see the main muzzle flash from the badge man. So that was Roscoe. Roscoe hit the president with 2 shots. He hit him through the sign, through the wooden sign. He shot him through the sign and went into the president's throat. I guess Roscoe, he just figured when he aimed it, if the little wooden sign didn't matter, he could just shoot right through it. He had already aimed and just fired, a second from when. A fraction of a second from when the president disappeared behind the sign, and he figured he'd still hit him in the head, but it deflected it a little bit. He wasn't exactly right, and it went down in to the president's throat. So that's what happened there. Okay, and then Roscoe hit the president with a second shot into the head. Okay, so 2 shots from Roscoe, the badge man. Okay. Roscoe, again, he was O&I, CIA, and Dallas Police there. Okay. Actually, what Roscoe, it was really, it worked really well. He was dressed as a Dallas policeman. And then after he did the shooting, Tippett evacuated the rifle, and Roscoe just walked away down through the crowd coming up. He just walked back down by the stairs, and he was seen by Beverly Oliver walking away as everybody was walking up in his police outfit. Okay, Beverly Oliver saw him. He didn't have his hat on or his gun belt, but he had his police outfit and he had his toupee on. Beverly Oliver saw him, okay, and she knew him because he used to come pick his wife up, who was a waitress at Jack Ruby's strip club, and so Beverly Oliver knew exactly what Roscoe looked like. She saw Roscoe walking off the knoll. And Beverly Oliver, by the way, was filming from the infield. She was the babushka lady. She definitely filming the assassination there, and she got her film confiscated the next Monday. That's my conclusion. I've interviewed Beverly many times and fact checked her, and it all checks out. It was her. She was babushka lady. Okay. Okay, so behind the southern fence, we had James Files here with Frank Sturgis right behind him, okay, managing him. James Files shot the president with a frangible round in 314, Zapruder frame 314, into the president's right temple, and it exploded out the back of the right side of the president's head. That was from James Files, shot a frangible bullet, managed by Frank Sturgis, who Files quickly passed the gun to Sturgis. He ran off the rifle down to the end of the rail yard and tossed it over the steam pipe to a third guy, who I believe was Jack Lawrence, okay, who broke the rifle down, put it in a bag, and then ran off across the rail yard, okay. So that was that action down there, okay. Jack Lawrence is also known as Donnie Lance, as Beverly Oliver had danced with him at the Dallas Cabana Motel the night before. So Donnie Lance, Jack Lawrence, an athletic guy. I'm saying he was probably the runner who ran off the rifle across the rail yard through the mud, got rid of the bag with a rifle in it somewhere, and went all the way back to his car dealership in downtown Dallas, and he was muddy all over his pants. So it's probably Jack Lawrence, okay. All this action back here behind the picket fence was witnessed by Lee Bowers in the switch tower, and also Ed Hoffman in the next freeway. So they saw all that. Lee Bowers and Ed Hoffman were 2 witnesses that saw all this from behind. One other, you have to call him a shooter, was behind the freeway sign was Gordon Ovell, who was the umbrella man, and he shot the president. It hit him in the side of the throat with a flechette, a paralytic flechette. And you can see a wound in one of the autopsy photos in the side, not the front wound from Roscoe, but in the side from Gordon Ovell. Okay, just wanted to mention that. He's sometimes forgotten, but Gordon Novel was a shooter, and that made the president freeze straight up, that flesh it, that it went into the president's throat. Okay, so Gordon Novel, don't want to forget about him. Okay, and then Gordon Novel's assistant, Orlando Bosch, who was an Operation 40 guy, he's the guy who stepped off the curb when the president still hadn't been hit. He stepped off the curb and put a closed fist over his head, signaled William Greer, the driver, to stop the limousine because the president hadn't been hit. So the final operation to take out the president had to kick in. They were hoping that one of these shooters would have scored a direct hit from the rear, but none of them did. And so Orlando Bosch signaled that the final takedown of the president, take out of the president, had to kick in. Okay, and that was approximately Zapruder frame 232 when Orlando Bosch gave Greer that signal. Okay, so that brings us to the final hit team, the Illuminati Deep State hit team. The Secret Service CIA hit team is located inside the presidential limousine. Okay, we know that now without any doubt. We've analyzed the Zapruder film from beginning to end, and there's many other details which I'm going to give in a subsequent video. But just wanted to mention here the shooters. Well, actually, the limo hit team is here. It's in this new book I've done with Rachel White called Takedown. So you had Roy Kellerman, the driver, Greer the driver, Kellerman, the passenger in front. Jackie Kennedy was a shooter. Greer, the driver, was a shooter, and the cleanup man was Clint Hill in the trailing automobile. Okay, and that's all in our new book Takedown, available on Amazon. Rachel White and myself. New book on the Kennedy hit. Okay. So as I said, the shooters were William Greer, the driver, Jackie Kennedy, passenger in the back seat, the spotters Roy Kellerman and Clint Hill, cleanup man, riding on the Queen Mary behind. So in Z313, William Greer shot JFK into his left temple with a paralytic shellfish toxin pellet that exploded throughout JFK's brain. William Greer stopped the car completely, and he did that to free his hands. He shot between he and Kellerman with a special pistol, paralytic pellet into left the president's head. Jackie Kennedy also went up through the left side of the president's head. She leaned over with her pistol inside the lamb chop puppet and shot. She leaned over and shot up through the left side of the president's head. I'm going to do a subsequent video on this, but it went straight up in the air, angling slightly. Jackie shot, angling slightly toward the triple underpass. It came to rest by the infield manhole cover in a clump of bone and brain matter. The bullet was in there, discovered by Sheriff Buddy Walters, assisted by Roger Craig. It's in Roger Craig's unpublished book. He tells about it. And the bullet, we even have a photograph of the FBI man, Robert Barrett, who was identified by Jim Garrison. Barrett denied that it was him, but Garrison matched it. And it is Robert Barrett, okay? And I even have that photo match in our book Takedown, who took Jackie's bullet away from by the manhole cover. It was sent to the FBI and never seen again, okay? So that's that. Okay, so those are the hit teams. That's the complete set. Okay. One more time, just to go over real quick. The shooters that I have were Harry Weatherford, Loy Factor, Mac Wallace, Chuck Nicoletti, Jim Brading, Gordon Novel, Charles Frederick Rogers, James Files, Roscoe White, Charles Harrelson, William Greer, Jackie Kennedy, Clyde Faust, and John Ernst. Okay, so those are the hit teams. That's the complete deal.